in the conversations. We're going to have, up first is Eliza with Geelong Cats, while Tom is just kind of getting set up quickly. Thanks everybody for coming in. We have a kind of offset presentation this afternoon. It's going to be Eliza first, and then Nick with Ohio State, followed by the U.S. Air Force Research Labs, and then University of Oregon AIS will be up for, we'll do a round of questions for the whole group, but we're going to kind of run through some round robin of presentations. We do need to ask that nobody takes any pictures or videos whatsoever, because there will be live player data up on the screen. So please and thank you in advance. Get him out of here. Okay, without further ado, Eliza Keaney, Geelong Football Club. Thank you, Eliza.
Hey everyone, thanks for coming. So, as mentioned, my name's Eliza Keaney. I'm the performance analyst at Geelong Cats. For those of you who don't know, it's a team in the Australian Rules Football League. So, equivalent to, I guess, what's the NFL over here. We are, if I do say so myself, quite a successful club. We finished on the second on the ladder last year, and in the last 10 years we've won the premiership 3 times. So we've had some really good success since it started. For those of you that don't know, and I'm more than happy if there's sort of strength and conditioning background here to talk about some of the demands of the games, but the players will run up to 15 kilometres per game. We have 4 quarters that they play, roughly around 30 minutes for each quarter. Some players might run up to 600 metres high speed, so over 24 kilometres per hour, so that's a big focus of a lot of our training and injury prevention, is to make sure that we're not setting up to do any soft tissue injuries. So today I'm going to go through some of the processes that we use, in particular TSB, training stress report, training stress balance, or what some of you may know as the acute to chronic ratio, a different terminology. So just start up here what Tom's got on the board. So this is our training readiness report, or game readiness dashboard that we start with. So every morning I'll go in before training and meet with our head strength and conditioning coach, high performance manager, and we'll actually go through this dashboard to look at any injury, any players that we think might be at danger of either undertraining, overtraining, of any injuries. So as you can see here on the far right, we've got total number of flags. So if Tom can just organise that by most flags. So you'll see up the top there, there's 4 flags. So the first player there has got 3 flags for their training stress balance. In the next column, you can actually see what those flags are. So we use, just to give you an idea for the stats that we use for those flags, if a player has a distance plus 24 metres or football minutes over 150% with their acute to chronic ratio, then that comes up as a flag for us. Some of you may have seen in the literature ratios used, so all that means is it's 1.5 versus 150%. We also do in our TSB, as you'll see a little bit later, we do flag for those players who have done too little training as well. As we know, that can be just as dangerous to injury occurrence as overtraining as well. So we really have to make sure those players don't slip through the cracks. And then we get that orange flag when the players are between that 130 and 150% of their training. The other one that you can see there is days since last run. So a really basic measure that we use. So if we've got a player who's played on a Friday night and we come in for our first or second training and they haven't run for 4 days, but they're expected to play in 2 or 3 days' time, that's a really big flag for us. With a list, we don't have a list as big as some sports, but we do still have 45 players. So if you're a strength and conditioning coach, if you're part of the rehab program, and for some reason you weren't there for the regeneration run, for any of their recovery, you might just forget that information or not know it, so that's really important to us. The other one, and we can order again with last speed insert. If you go from, so you can see up the top. So we count a speed insert as over 90% of their high speed running. So they're basically their max velocity. We want them to have a certain number of speed inserts over 90% of that max to prevent, as I was talking about, those soft tissue injuries. So the most prevalent in AFL is hamstring and calf injuries, and that's another measure that we look at. So same thing again, especially for game readiness. If we know that that player hasn't done a speed insert for 156 days, then we're not going to put them into a match. Obviously they're the players who would be in rehab at the moment, but that's a really important measure. So that's our speed insert, and then we also take notice of how often they're running above 95% max speed as well, just to prevent that from happening. The other one we've got there is the body check. So with the body check and through SmarterBase, you can also send out alerts for basically any measures or any data that you're putting into SmarterBase. So every morning we have our players doing what's called a body check. It's just 3 simple tests that they do for their, mainly their calves, hamstrings and groins. And if they get above a certain percent difference from their mean average, then we will get a text message straight away sent out to our physios, so they're able to follow up with those players straight away. So SmarterBase has the ability for those individual players to just log their own data. It means that the physios and strength and conditioning staff don't have to be there to guide them through it, to baby them through, but they still get that flag and can still follow up with the player if the player fails to go to them. As I said, it is sent in a text message, but it's also just a great addition to have to this report as well if we're already looking at the information. So what we might go through next is the training stress balance report. So with the TSB, from that readiness, say we've got some flags that come up in that every morning. So if they've got 2 or 3 flags that are coming up, we're then able to jump straight into our more specific dashboards and get more information on it. So this one here's the training stress. If you go to the first tab, Tom, the individual. So this up the top here, you can see it just breaks down the individual data for that player. So what I was talking about before with that acute to chronic, and some people in the literature, people use different days, different time periods, but for acute we use the last 7 days and chronic's the last 28 days. This has been proven to be the most effective in Australian rules football. If we go back up to the table up the top, you can see here some of the measures that I was talking about that we flagged with. So one of the big focuses that we've had, once again, sounds like a really basic thing, but is football minutes. So how many minutes are those players actually training for? We know if we're just looking at total distance, then it can be deceptive how much is conditioning versus specific football drills. So that's a measure that we really value. The mechanical work there is a value that we actually derive ourselves. So it's a combination of change of direction, accelerations, decelerations. Really important in Australian rules football. We have a position called midfielders who are on the ball and they're chasing the ball around, moving side to side. So we need to know if they've had any prevalence of groin injuries before, those sorts of things, and they're returning to play, then we need to know that they're capable of changing directions and doing those accelerations, decelerations during training and during match play as well. Once again, you'll see the plus 24 running that we use. So if we scroll down a little bit, the first one that we've got here is just the total distance measures. What SmarterBase has added into this report, which is really nice as well, is the injuries. So you'll see where the red dots are where injuries have occurred for that player. So all of a sudden, not only do you have those acute, chronic values that we're looking at, but you can look at where those injuries occurred and compare it to the data to see if there were any abnormalities to what occurred at that certain time. When we scroll down, you can, in this dashboard, you can customize exactly what metrics you want to put in there. So we worked with SmarterBase to and you'll see the same metrics that we focus on going through. plus 24 running, and then if we go down to the very bottom one, so this is probably one of the most useful ones that I find. So as I was saying before, a lot of focus on high speed, plus 24 running. We've customised these colours to suit our program, so if you're from another sport and you do more top end speed, less top end speed, you can change around those colours as well. For us, the green is anything that's plus 90%, so it's basically a speed insert. So rather than just look at the specific value, we're actually able to see how often those speed inserts are occurring and where they're occurring in their training period as well. The nature of AFL, the main spike that you will get for the week, for the month, is on game day. So we play 1 game per week and the season's for 23 weeks. So very different to a baseball and NBA sort of structure, but you will just get that 1 spike per week, and that's what we try and do. This is an example of pre-season training. And so the next one that would jump in, still the same one, but right up the top tab, if we go to the weekly view. So as well as having those graphs, we can then break down the data even further. So those graphs are really nice for coaches to get a snapshot of, sometimes even still too much information, but this is where the physio and sports scientist staff can actually come down and see what's happening on a given day, given week. So down the left-hand side, you won't be able to see them, but is the entire list of the players, and then the individual sessions going along the top. So if we do get any of those flags, we're then able to go back to the data and see why they may have occurred. Some of those flags might happen at the start of the season when, if they haven't trained for 2 weeks, of course they're doing, percentages higher than they've done for those 2 weeks. Same thing over certain break periods that we've designed for that to happen as well. But it's just about knowing and where it comes into that actual versus planned percentages and loads and everything as well. We do also take subjective measure in internal for RPE, so we do a measure of RPE times load as well as with the GPS metrics, and we do use heart rate data as well, just to give you an understanding for it. So in that first tab where we went through with the tables, there was an RPE load one there too. On the other point with that, so you see that there's a rolling and a weekly table that we have. So the weekly is just your actual week, so Monday to Sunday you're looking at the data. But you can imagine if you're going into training on a Monday and you open up that tab, your percentages are going to be 0. So you haven't achieved anything for that week. So that's why we also use the rolling tab. So the rolling tab will give you, if it's a Monday, will give you Monday back to the last Monday as well. So that gives you more of a feel for it. But if you are going into a game, if you're playing on a Saturday, looking at this on a Friday, then it's a really good snapshot to see if those players have already achieved 150% in that week. Then you might start to flag them, pull them out of things, modify those loads if there was expected. A really big one for this that we use with, in particular, 2nd and 3rd year players is for the high speed running. So if they've done 600 metres in a session, and that's really big for a player, then we have the ability with this data on hand to then modify the next session that they do, so they're not putting themselves at risk of a soft tissue injury. And then the last one is the threshold tab. So this is a really nice one to just see a snapshot of the players' maximums that they've done. In particular for this one is for a pre-season, but we can also go back year to year as well. So this is just the current data, but we can compare it to the maximum, for example, the maximum distance that player has ever done in one session. So it's really powerful. If we're seeing a flag come up from our data, we can then look back, or our data, we can look back and have a look through to see at this stage last season, whereabouts was that player. And if we can see that it's the maximum that they've ever done, it's a real flag to pull back on those players. So a really good example again is with the 2nd and 3rd year players. 1st year players come into the program and they're nursed pretty easily into it. And then the coaches get really excited, and when they come back for their 2nd or 3rd year, their training, they come back a bit earlier than the senior players, and their training just gets off to a flying start. So it's a really big thing to look at, okay, this is actually the most distance. It might be 200% more than they did in a given week versus their previous couple of seasons. So it's a really powerful one for that. This one here is an example of a training report that we use. So up the top, we can see that it's highlighted just our drills, which is what I was talking about with the football minutes. So it's one report, but it gives the ability for the physios, strength and conditioning staff, sports scientists and coaches all to use that same report, but modify it to their needs. So this is the football specific. If Tom goes up to the top and selects on the conditioning, then it just gives us the conditioning drills out of that session. So you can see how it can be really powerful to just go through those distances. The coach doesn't need to know what was occurring for that player when they were doing 2 times 60 or when they were doing grids, but for the rehab or sports scientist, it's really powerful information. So if we go back to just the drill selection, and I'll just talk through it a little bit more. So under the session drill summary, it gives you those averages for the drills on the left-hand side. And once again, you're starting to see that theme with the same metrics. So total distance plus 24 mechanical work. And then if we go down a little bit further, you'll see it goes to the position summary. So these are the main positions that we have in AFL, and we can start to look at what the norms were for those positions. And then going down even further, and just dragging those names a little bit. So this is once again the whole squad. So it's really easy to just compare them. So it's just, as I said, a coach might look at this and only look at one section, and we can hide those sections as well if we don't want them to look at it. Once again, fully interactive. You can order it as you like with any of the metrics. Probably just the last one. Which one have we got left? Dashboards, if you go up the top. Yeah, so I'll go through. So this will be the last one. This one was a really big win for us. So our medical staff used to do, well, they still do screening, but all of their screening, the players would come to their station. They would do it spread across a couple of days. The players would come to their station, so you'd have your physio, your doctor, S&C, dietitian, and they would have the players rotating through. When, in previous years when they've done this, they would use a pen and paper and just simply write those numbers on it, and then they would then spend another day, or half a day, however long it took, to then collate all of that data from all 4 people into one spreadsheet. Smarterbase gives us the ability for them to all do this simultaneously. So even though this is all pulling through on the one report, we have individual forms set up for that personnel to go through. So the strength and conditioning staff can go through and just get those 4 tests that are relevant to them. The nutritionist can go through and just enter their skin folds, anything that's relevant for them. And then when they sit down and all look at it as a group, they still have the ability to get every test up. We've got the ability as well to use our own conditional formatting again to flag anything that we think's above or below normality. And then if we go back up to the top again, so this is just the one for an individual person, but then we can also go up to the group screening tab. And the group screening, once again, gives us the ability to compare athlete to athlete. So a lot of these tests, you don't actually really care where they are compared to another athlete because it's so individualised to their training age and any previous injuries that they've had. But some things that we have, such as some of the strengths tests, some of the fitness tests, even skin folds, you actually do want to see where they are in relation to that as well. Yeah, so that's basically about it. I'm still here if anyone wants to, or if there's any questions now, or if anyone wants to chat through anything afterwards, feel free to come and say hi.
Let's hold the questions to the end. We'll have everybody kind of come up together to the panel and questions for all of them. So thank you very much to Eliza. Next up is Nick DAmico. Yeah, DAmico. Sorry. Nick is with USAF, several research labs as well. And he's going to talk to you today a little bit about what he does with Ohio State athletics. So we'll give him a second to set up. And again, thank you very much everybody for attending and joining us. We need to please ask no photos, because a lot of this is Eliza did is actual data from their actual site. So no pictures, no videos. Thank you very much.
All right, so my name is Nick DAmico. I work with the United States Air Force Research Labs. What we're specifically doing there, and Dr. Strang will come up after me and talk a little bit more about the military in general, but essentially what we're doing is we're working on performance enhancement and injury risk, decreasing injury risk for our operators. When we first started this out, it was extremely difficult for us to go out and test some of those operators within the military for various reasons. So what we did is we started cold calling athletic departments and seeing if we could work with them. So we hit pretty big with The Ohio State University, got a little bit with University of Cincinnati. What I'm doing specifically with Wright Pat is I am managing our interaction with those two universities. So right now with Ohio State, we've got their entire athletic department that's coming through Smartabase, and then I'm the one who's managing getting data in, getting data out, analyzing, giving to coaches, giving them end of season analysis, things like that. So what I'll do here is I will drive through our site for Ohio State, show you what we've built for them. It's still a breathing animal at this point. We went live in August of this year. So since then it's made ridiculous bounds and we still have more to go. Yeah. So this is a coach's front page, what they're going to see. As you'll see with our site, we have a lot of the same data that then gets shown in a bunch of different ways so that they have differences to look at it. One of the first things that I always tell them to go to is this front page reports, and here's where I'll put some of the reports that I find are very important to see on a daily basis. I'm going to go through the performance side of things first and show you a couple different examples of how we view that through measurement, through analysis, and then I will then go into the medical side of things. And I'll probably go pretty quickly, so I'll be around afterwards if anyone wants to look into anything specifically. So one of the things that we use across a lot of different sports, because it's what we think is one of our most important, is a megawave. What that's going to do is it's going to look at your heart rate variability and tell you how well you recovered from yesterday's activity. Right on their front page, I have an Omega Wave front page report. All of these things are sortable in here, so you can look at pretty much which athletes are we considering out of balance or in balance, and then which athletes need a certain type of recovery. So that coach can come and just see right off the bat, which players do I need to recover today, which players are good to go for that aspect. Let's say that they want to see it a little bit more in depth. You can go to this performance summary reports. In here, once again, everything's sortable, but you can see how these areas here, which are Omega Wave, interact with everything else around it. If you want, you can click in further and just see this portion specifically, and if you want, you can click further than that and see that athlete's history over time. So once again, we built multiple levels for these coaches, multiple places to see all this stuff so that they can decide how far, how deep do they want to go into this data. If we go back home, the last thing that we have for Omega Wave is a time series dashboard. What this is going to show is in the last 30 days, the percentage of athletes that we are considering out of balance in each way and in balance. And then once again over time, it's going to show how many athletes are doing that, so you can see a bit of compliance here. And then you can see how many athletes each day are in balance or out of balance. And then you can go down to athlete specific as well. So you can see specifically, like this athlete has a couple of non-compliances in here. He was parasympathetic for a very long time, then went back to normal, and it looks like he's doing pretty good now. So once again, just a bunch of different ways to see the same type of stuff. The next example that I'll go over is our wellness and RPE questionnaires, which is available to all of the students at Ohio State. Right off the bat on front page report, the first thing that they're going to want to know is if they did it or not. So I've got a compliance sheet right here that pretty much just says Omega Wave Wellness RPE, yesterday, did they do it, did they not do it? So you can see that these athletes here all did it, these athletes did not, this athlete hasn't done anything. So you can provide that correctional action that you need to take. Bear with me here, I will quickly sign out and show you what the athlete sees. So this is essentially our mobile site. Once the athlete signs in, it's really simple for them. We only want them looking at 2 different questionnaires, so they have the option to enter data or change the history, or look at the history of that data. If they enter data, all they have is that morning wellness and post-session questionnaire. When they go in, it's going to ask them a couple questions that we find to be very important about their wellness. And what's great about this is as I'm doing this, some of these questions have flags on them that then populate in Smartabase. What we do is we'll look at it over time and see if you have like a few days in a row. For instance, this overall stress flag here, if they put high or very high 5 days in a row, it's going to send an automatic alert to their AT and their strength coach telling them that they're stressed out. And just creating a talking point between the strength coach and the AT. The other great thing that you can do here is you can have some conditional visibility. So this are you entered question, if you put no, nothing pops up. If you put yes, you can enter a pain index score. Just an easy way of making it very user-friendly for the athlete. And then the last thing we have here is specific muscle soreness, where they can specifically put in what areas they're sore. And it looks like this is not working on the desktop site. But essentially what you do is you can select up to 8 places. Once you're finished with that, you click next, and then you can do a certain soreness for each location. That's also set up on a base of flags that you can see. If someone puts that their knee was sore 4 days in a row, it'll pop an alert to you, tell you, hey, this guy's knee's been sore. It just creates that talking point again. Once that gets saved, it gets sent over to the site here. I will log in again. So since it's all working on the cloud, it comes in right away. I didn't save anything, so nothing's going to pop up right away that you guys can see. So the way that the coach is going to view this, once again, he can go into performance summary reports and see this wellness here. What's showing on the first page is an overall wellness score. When we click in, we can see each of those important top questions that we thought went into the wellness score, and then once again he can click in and see that all-time history if he wants to. We also have a dashboard set up for wellness, which I really like. Once again, we pulled up those 5 or 6 whatever questions that we thought were important. Once again, it's going to show the height of the graph is the amount of people that did their survey that day, so you can see these are some non-compliance days. And then the color of the graph is what they did. So this is specifically soreness. If you're worried about, right here there's 1 athlete that put very high, 2 athletes that put high. If you click into that, you can actually see which athletes put those. So once again, just creating that talking point, letting you go in and monitor your athletes very well. And then the last thing that we have that they can go in and look at each athlete specific. This is not completely built out yet, mainly because not a lot of our users utilize this because it is very specific. But if you go into this athlete hub, click on an athlete specifically, you can see some of this data for that athlete specifically. So if we go to morning wellness, you can see the latest wellness entry here, and then you can see well-being score over time, sleep quality over time, fluid intake over time, just everything that we pulled out is important over time, so you can track that athlete throughout time. And then finally, what you really care about is what happens when we put all this stuff together, right? Like you can look at each thing individually and see what's important, what's not important for yourself, but we want to make it as easy as possible. So we have this readiness dashboard, which then goes in and tells you last 28 days, pretty much from a percentage standpoint, is the athlete green ready to go, yellow caution, or red not ready to go. So within the last 28 days, it'll give you percentages there, and then it'll tell you current athletes. And then you have these player cards here, which if they were actual athletes, it would show their picture. You'd see each part that we pulled out that we thought was important, a stoplight color to show you what it is, and then based on what those are, it'll tell you if they're ready to go or not. You can sort by best status, worst status, and then what's great about this is you can flip over the card and you can see some interesting things that you want to. Like all of this is completely customizable, so we put in whatever we think is important. For instance, this athlete here has a lot of greens, 1 yellow and 1 red. So most likely the reason he's red is because of that red omega wave score. We wanted to flip over the card and see why are they red. Okay, well they have a parasympathetic flag. So telling us stuff that we already know from everything else that I've shown you, but this puts it in one nice, easy location. So up next would be actually there's one more thing. So the last thing that we provide for our coaches is some of them want to see a nicer daily snapshot that we felt we couldn't really build in Smartabase. We're really excited for the updated D3 builders that we can go in and try to make some of these things within Smartabase. But we wanted to give them like an overall summary of of everything that they're doing, looking at training stress balances, things like that. And what this is a sheet that we're pretty much pulling from a report in Smartabase, pushing live to Excel, so that when the coach opens it up, he'll put in his password, and then it will automatically update for the current set of data. So as you can see here, it's showing today's wellness, today's RPE, today's Zephyr load, today's Zebra load, and then you can see they're all flagged with these TSBs and score values. So this coach can look in and he can see, okay, external workload, this Zebra value, looks like everyone's doing pretty good. Some people are really underworked, and then this RPE, a lot of players are saying that this practice was really hard. Obviously this is fake data, so that doesn't make sense, but it's just a one-stop shop for the coaches to come in and see a lot of stuff. So then next I'll go over the medical portion that we have built up. Mainly that's running through this hub here. What you'll do is you click on the hub, click on the athlete that you want to look at, and then you have some athlete summary data. They wanted to know athlete information, emergency contact information, insurance policy information, things like that. The next area here is medical summary. So this is really where they're spending most of their time. If they have an athlete with a new injury, they'll just click this new injury button and go in and fill out a new injury form for them. If they're looking at an old injury, they'll just click in the one that's standing right here and go out and fill that out. We have the exact same thing for non-injury treatments, illnesses, and then we also have medical tests, encounter surgeries, and then we've got this resolved area as well. So once they figure out that it's resolved, it'll pop over to this other side so that they're not bothered with things that they've already done. They can look at it when they want to, but when they're using the site, they don't have to look at it. And then this performance summary is something we're still building out. The next step that we're going into is seeing that crossover between medical and performance, seeing like what we want to take from the AT side, let the strength coaches see, what we want to take from the strength coach side, and let the ATs see. And then right now I just have those couple injuries filled out, but as you build that out, I gave those medical staff this front page report for injuries so that they can go in and they can see, okay, if instead of looking at each player specifically, I can just look at an overall view of what's open right now. So that's pretty much the site. Like I said, we're still live building, so there's still a lot that we need to go through, a lot that we need to add and change on here, but since August, this is where we're at.
Awesome. Thank you to Nick. And then just the one last presentation that we have is actually a teaser for the 3 o'clock presentation. 3 o'clock? So anybody that wants to come back or tell their friends if you loved it, feel free to come back again at 3. But yeah, Dr. Adam Strang is up next, and let's just give him a second to get the laptop up, and he'll be up and running. Thank you.
Show a pointer. Oh. How do I go? Awesome. So before we get started, I want to say that relationship with Ohio State and University of Cincinnati has been really important for us to be able to incubate and develop basically over the last 9 months some of the technologies that we eventually want to roll out to the operational community. So my name is Adam Strang. I work for the 711th Human Performance Wing. We're located at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. I got to give this disclosure and disclaimer, right? I have no conflicts of interest, and the opinions I'm expressing are mine. They don't reflect the recommendations or endorsement of the U.S. Air Force. So here's a little bit of a background. So I basically run the coolest exercise science lab in the Department of Defense, like hands down. We really established and rebranded ourselves about back in January of 2015, and I just happen to be one of the researchers that is a part of this lab. We set up the Strong Lab as a shared laboratory space to promote collaboration across the Human Performance Wing. So we have biomedical engineers, chemists, psychobiologists, exercise physiologists. I'm an athletic trainer and cognitive psychologist, software engineers, and strength coaches. Back in around 2014, 2015, my former partner, Josh Hagan, and I kind of had this idea of developing a dashboard for the human weapons system, right? And this was on the heels of wearables happening, right? All of a sudden, we were just flooding the market with wearables, and we want to figure out what to do with them. And for a long time, we were thinking, oh my gosh, we need to develop our own software platform. This is where we were 4 or 5 years ago. So we're like out soliciting different software companies, presenting this type of idea, and trying to figure out how we're going to assimilate all these types of technologies so we can get to something like this. I need a readiness dashboard. I want to know how many calories are burned. I need to know core temperature and hydration status in this kind of nice color-coded dash. So in between here and when we started using Smartabase, what we embarked on was like optimizing the human weapon system with all these different components. So for instance, we started using Zephyr bands, especially inside our training pipelines for heat and safety monitoring, specifically because the Zephyrs are embedded with the Userium Army algorithm that takes its heart rate and does a pretty good job predicting core temperature. And so we've actually been using that. I'd say it's actually more than 75 plus heat injuries that we think we've prevented over the last couple years. So we're turning these kind of technologies into actionable data. We started doing some other field testing with things like underwater pulse oximetry so that we can prevent and stop shallow water blackouts, which is a big attrition inside our special operations pipeline. The swimming component's always the most difficult. And then we started also kind of doing things like, okay, can we do prescriptive recovery in training, both in special operations units and with university athletic teams. The real key for working with university athletics is that all their game and training performance analytics that's going on the military side, it's much more nebulous, right? It's like it's pass-fail, or the mission was completed or it wasn't completed. And it's really difficult to monitor the independent components of each operator. But sports has done a little bit better job, so they essentially set up the bullseye that we could aim at for some of the technologies, and then we just kind of took a leap of faith to say, okay, this is what we learned from sport, and then we can maybe transition it over. So we've been doing things like actually trying to look at like HRV statistics and trying to predict wins and losses in like women's soccer and stuff like that. And listen, like we're running stacked models, and the best we'll show the best model, let's say 77%. The worst model is like chance, so it's not like I'm going to go to Vegas and lay a bet down on it. But that's kind of the direction that we're trying to head, right? So it's one thing to do the data visualization and aggregation, which Smartabase has been fantastic for us, but it's another thing to get prediction aligned with that. And we've been working both avenues. All right, so here we go. Phase one of what we're calling the Combat 24/7 Fitness System that we started in 2017. We were looking for a human performance tool to aggregate data from validated human performance technologies that are coming out of our lab. We want to apply custom analytics and algorithms, and then we need to create visualizations that people can digest. Why we need to develop it? I mean, I think I'm kind of preaching to the choir here, but I love all these human performance technologies, sports science technologies that are coming, but they're all siloed. Every company thinks they're a hardware and software company, and everybody's trying to license you to use their stuff and that you want to use it exclusively. But the truth of the matter is like from our perspective, it's sort of like get integrated into something that we can build as a holistic system all the way around, so that we can combine our daily physiological monitoring with our movement screens that is overlaid with our injury data. So we said, okay, after looking through everything and testing a lot of the other things that were on the market, it was clear to us that SmartaBase, at least at present, gives us by far the most flexibility to build things out the way that we want to. So it basically works as SmartaBase we selected to power the Combat 24/7 fitness system, and it has the ability to apply all the analytics that we're developing inside Strong, and it can aggregate data from anywhere via the API or CSV exports. And actually really important to us is that it's going to be HIPAA compliant, so moving forward we can have some medical information in there. So I wanted to tell you some of the future looks that we're going to be doing for our military operational units. You're going to notice a lot of things from the Ohio State site that are going to be similar as we move forward. But this is a great example of something in the Air Force that we call the stickman report. It's basically your unit status report. Who is ready to deploy, who's not mission ready, and who's partially mission ready if there is such a thing. And this is exactly how it's being created inside the Air Force right now. And what happens is their sports medicine team, they sit around, they create these reports, they give them to a commander checks it off, he sends it up to headquarters, right? And I'm not sure they really use it that well for decision making. It's more like just kind of checking a balance, and over time saying like, well, what's the average like availability rate of a certain unit at any time, right? So the cool thing, one of the bad things you'll see is this is a really top-down, or like I'd say across the board horizontal look at it. You can't really dig down, and you can't take a macro look, so you can't like compress up and down at will. So this is the future stickman report that we've built out in SmartaBase using the player card look. So you can imagine this is one of our special operations unit. The commander's logging in from his government computer. He's taking a look and he says, I got 12% mission capable, 8% partially mission capable, and then he can rack and stack by best or worst. And then just like Nick was showing on the well-being, on the back end, what he can actually see is his human performance team and their plan of action. So yeah, okay, this guy's got some kind of psych problem. What's the psych problem on the back where? And then I don't take the decision out of the commander's hand. He still decides if people are going to go and where they're going to go. But at least we have like more of a veridical look at what the information can be. Oh yeah, and you can do that on your mobile app now. I can show you guys afterwards with all fake data, of course, that's generated in here. There's no real Adam Smith. Or there may be. All right, so here's how they used to do, or they're currently doing unit encounters tracking. So this is like the number of treatments when you go in to see your athletic trainer or physical therapist, right? It's all kept on Excel sheets, and this is actually one of the best ones I've seen. Most of them are not this good. And so it takes weeks when a unit or a command comes down to say, hey, how many treatments did you guys do last year? And on this number of body segments, and what's the return on investment for this, right? So one of the things we started doing was building this dashboard, which actually logs the daily treatments for the sports medicine teams. And actually, I can assign a dollar value to each one of those treatments that come in. So when a command, this happens all the time. Like these sports medicine teams that are embedded within the units, they're really expensive, right? So we get a question like, what's the return on investment, right? And now I can show you daily, not just who's being treated, what are the most common treatments, where are the body areas that they're going, but I can assign a numeric value to each one of those encounters, right? And you can, athletic trainer can turn around and just say, hey man, you're getting your bang for your buck, right? And it's really easy for us to take that look. The final one I wanted to show you guys is how we're doing current performance tracking. These are like our physical fitness test assessments, right? And right now it's like, again, we're back into Excel. We might do these, once or twice a year if we can actually get the guys back into their home station to get tested. We do some comparison amongst the different, what we'll call flights, or troops, or we might do it across like the entire squadron or something like that. But now what we've been able to do is start going in and start building out these athlete hubs. So when we get into the hubs, the level of information gets a lot more detailed. I can combine their biannual physical fitness test with all the daily wellness assessments that we're collecting from them, whether that's coming from survey data or physiological data. And we have this kind of goal in the laboratory that we're just always pressing toward is ask less and less questions, get more and more objective from biophysiological data. So you can see, like I can look at his number of counters, his FMS, the last 3 times he did his pararescue fitness test, or the exposures and loads that he's going through during that day. So I get multiple views of what the state of that operator is if I want to drill down that deeply. Okay, so what's next, all right? So the big thing that I'm pushing for is integrations. That is where I want to give more options and capability for new performance technology to be ingested into SmartAbase. What I'm talking about is wearables, movement screenings, and third-party training apps, things like Train Heroic and Bridge Athletics that we do a lot of our strength and conditioning prescriptions on. They're going to be vital moving forward. We're moving into the next phase of what we're doing. You saw Nick present on it just a little bit more. We're actually taking that data and then turning around to make suggestions about what the prescription should be. For instance, flagging 3 days in a row high parasympathetic is going to put you in a float tank recovery, or at least we're going to recommend that type of protocol. We're starting with those and then using hard data and statistics over time to refine whether that decision of a 3-day cycle is actually appropriate or not. So it's kind of always a living beast. We're getting into things like nutrition. So what is the impact of like using specifically inside of training pipelines, different types of nutritional supplements, and how's that playing out in their wellness and sleep and other things like that. And again, I talked about the recovery techniques. And finally, the last thing we're going to move into, but this is where actually, frankly, we move into a different like security class level, is when we start thinking about we go after the human capital of our operators, and that is like we can do appointment scheduling inside SmartAbase. We actually have the whole looks already built out, so you can, doesn't matter where you're at, where you're deployed, where your TDY, which is like business travel or training travel, you can contact your sports medicine team and set up that appointment and have a dialogue with them as opposed to just doing it over email or text as they're currently doing. We can actually store an entire unit's battle rhythm that is basically like their mission and deployment training schedule inside here, and we have looks that build that out, but of course we don't go with that live yet, but I think we're heading there in the future. And then training evaluations, so you can imagine like whether it's the performance or psychological training evaluation of the cadre of trainees as they're going through their entire career, we can store that data, and we have certain forms and visualizations already built for that kind of stuff, so that when we actually meet the security requirements that we're going to need to use SmartAbase in that way in the future, or any type of management system that we can just plug and play as soon as we're ready to roll. And thanks for your time.
Adam, thank you. So yeah, that's all of the presentations for the lunch presentation. If anybody has any questions, they're all going to be here in the room hanging out, so if you want to pull them aside and talk separately. But thank you to Adam, Eliza, and Nick very much. Thanks, guys.